afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first senior project presentation this year. I have the pleasure of advising and introducing Ella DeMay. She has a history of investigating problems that affect people, including us here today, but also all over the world. And in addition to just investigating, she's definitely invested in finding solutions to those problems. I have no doubt you will enjoy and learn quite a bit from her presentation today. Let's welcome Ella.
I have a passion for discovering inequalities, understanding their implications, and searching for issues that might help those who are suffering. Throughout my time at VNS, I have learned about educational inequality in Pakistan, human cooperation, universal basic income, and consumerism. Within each project, I have discovered problems that cause great harm, learned about paths that resolve them, and taking some action to help. I have also done a project on cookies. For those of you who know me well, you know that I value food and the experiences it offers. For instance, when my mom makes her signature popovers during Thanksgiving break, the experience is not only defined by the food, but also sharing a nice family meal on the day off of school. Similarly, trying pickled herring in the Netherlands was not so memorable because of the taste of the food. I'm really not a raw fish person. But having the experience a new culture through food was greatly valuable. Maybe you can think of some food-related memories that you value. Your parents having a hot meal for you at the end of a long day, eating cookies right out of the oven, or going for celebratory ice cream after you hit a milestone. Talking with Lawrence University professor Carla Daughtry during my research confirmed to me that food defines who we are. Though it may not seem remarkable, the food you physically consume builds your body and also signifies your place in a culture or group. Unfortunately, people all over the world miss out on this component of their identity because they don't have enough food. While the relationship between food and culture is fascinating, none of the emotional or social ties we have with food would exist if not for the fuel we derive from it. As much as we might not think about it, we need food. We need it to grow, learn, connect with others, and make any progress in living a joy-filled, rewarding life. Food is a basic human right. Therefore, we must have a sustainable agriculture system that keeps us fed now and long into the future. When I talk about agriculture, I'm referring to the large-scale system of growing food for humans. However, humans have not always been fed by such a system. In earlier times, many households in the U.S. owned land and raised their own livestock to feed their own families. As farming practices developed, fewer workers were required to grow food, and many people moved to urban settings. This is when the agriculture industry really took shape. In many Western nations, large-scale farms began to become responsible for a majority of food production. Unfortunately, the way that food is currently being grown, distributed, and consumed does not meet the nutritional needs of many people across the world. On top of that, the system also pollutes our environment, kills microscopic and sea-dwelling life forms, and contributes to global climate change. To sum up, our agriculture system doesn't work now, and it won't work unless we learn more about how it functions and what we can do to fix it. Let me repeat that. Our agriculture system doesn't work now, and it won't work unless we learn more about how it functions and what we can all do to fix it. This is the 2019 Eat-Lancet Commission report on global nutrition. It reviews a few key discoveries about how people eat around the world and how we grow the food that they do. It concludes that with a growing number of mouths to feed, limited stores of fossil fuels, and changing climate, the way we grow food and consume it will not support human life or sustainability for long. This is not the only report to reveal the precarious state of agriculture. After interviews with professors at Lawrence, the University of Washington, Chicago State University, a phone call with an author, attendance at 2 Nobel conferences, and meetings with several agricultural workers in the state, the idea that agriculture needs attention is well corroborated. Creating a sustainable agriculture system is necessary for 2 big reasons. First, we humans need nourishment to survive. And secondly, we need a planet, and the future of the environment and agriculture are deeply intertwined. Let's start by examining the current state of nutrition. Right now, many people in developing countries suffer from malnutrition. Thankfully, between 1990 and 2017, there was a 17% reduction in chronically undernourished individuals. However, this still leaves 13% of that same population that is in a state of undernutrition. According to the Eat Lancet Commission, 820 million people do not have access to proper nutrition. Not having enough food debilitates people from their normal functions. Among adults, starvation is not only severely uncomfortable, but means individuals don't have the energy to complete daily functions that require fuel, like making a living or caring for their family. Micronutrient deficiencies, caused by not eating enough vitamin-rich foods, can lead to problems such as loss of eyesight or anemia. Among children, the consequences are worse. Without the right amount of food and nutrients, kids lack the ability to develop and grow. Because of this, those who find themselves in hunger-stricken situations face permanent stunting and illness. When we Americans think about malnutrition, we often think of individuals in faraway developing countries. However, malnutrition also exists near us, likely in the form of overnutrition. Where undernutrition is unhealthy because of the lack of calories, overnutrition is harmful because of the surplus of calories. Both of these kinds of malnutrition can be worsened by nutrient deficiencies. It is easy to discount overnutrition. Fundamentally, it is defined as having too much food. However, obesity isn't just a threat to those who are able to afford surplus of food. It's also dangerous to those living in situations of food insecurity, surrounded by unhealthy foodscapes. People in impoverished situations, both in the US and a growing number of other countries, are at great risk to develop nutrition-related diseases. Because of the prevalence of unhealthy, convenient, and affordable foods, those who live in areas with low grocery store access or tight financial situations find it very challenging to attain healthy food. This issue of health being expensive results from many forces, some of which are deeply entrenched in our food production. Inherently, the nutrition we experience is reliant upon how well we grow, distribute, and choose to consume food. Throughout human history, technological advances have been significantly impacted the growth and distribution of food. Long ago, people were subsistence farmers. But with the invention of the plow, the amount of labor required to grow food decreased, and people were able to spend more time developing other areas of human culture and technology, including further ways to make farming more productive and efficient. After the Second World War, the use of fertilizers entered the mass agriculture scene. Ammonium nitrate, an ingredient to make bombs, was found to boost crop yields. Ammonium, phosphorus, nitrogen, and calcium were also found highly effective. As humans began to convert and apply more of these elements to farmland, growth was boosted. Farmers were able to grow great amounts of food to help feed hungry mouths across the country. The government also took steps to feed more people by offering security and structure to our country's farmers. It offers subsidies to promote as much profit as possible in good years and to ensure that farmers would be able to stay above water in the bad ones. Growing crops like corn and grain offers the highest yields, so to maximize production, the government deemed that farmers should solely farm these types of commodity crops. The addition of input-heavy, subsidized farming did a lot of great things for America and helped improve the state of hunger throughout the US. Unfortunately, the shift to heavy input low diversity farming also cause a number of consequences for the land. Soil contains a number of remarkable systems that allows plants to create food out of sunlight. Here's a quick, simplified biology refresher. This is a plant. It requires CO2, sunlight, and some water to grow. When it has those ingredients, it can turn them into oxygen, carbohydrates, and eventually some other macronutrients like fat and protein. For now though, we're going to focus on the way it exchanges carbon. A portion of the carbon from the CO2 intake goes into making those carbohydrates I mentioned. Some of it, however, is exuded into the soil, helping to keep it healthy. Plants have a symbiotic relationship with the organisms in the soil, like fungus or bacteria. This means that they each do something for one another and receive something in return. More specifically, plants give soil life carbon, which feeds them. Those tiny life forms then convert minerals and vitamins from rocks underground into usable forms that the plant can absorb. These nutrients play a powerful role in vibrant growth. This impressive cycle has enabled humans to grow food for ages. If every plant and byproduct stays within this cycle, it is endlessly renewable. Unfortunately, when we take food away from the land, eat it, digest it, and dispose of it elsewhere, the system is disrupted. Since conventionally farmed plants get their primary nutrients from fertilizers, they do not need the soil below them. This means that the microbes in the soil stop converting vitamins and nutrients from the ground for the plants and lose their function. This results in products, or foods, with lower micronutrient density. Tilling, which has been around much longer than humans have been converting chemicals for fertilizers, also deteriorates the integrity of the soil. In fact, many past civilizations, like the Romans and Aztecs, have experienced great devastation because of unsustainable practices. Tilling is a widespread farming practice used to break up soil, mix organic materials, and prevent weeds. In both small and large-scale farming operations, most people till the land to prepare it and make it easier to handle. By simply turning over your garden with a shovel or plowing your field, tilling is an inexpensive way to prepare land for new crops. However, when a plow is drawn through farm fields, it entirely disrupts the structure of the soil. The interconnected tunnels and root systems below ground are torn apart, killing beneficial bacteria and fungus and making underground life effectively homeless. The destroyed habitat not only means that an army of plant helpers is wiped out, but that the land is less resilient to changes above ground, the amount of water applied. Without tunnels below the ground, fields are unable to absorb excess water in times of heavy rainfall, or store up extra for periods of drought. Tilling the ground, though beneficial for short-term weed prevention, wipes out the beneficial growing strength of the soil. Losing soil structure causes land to decrease in yield, resilience, and leads to a great deal of chemical and soil loss. Ideally, when water hits farmland, it is absorbed. However, when too much of it hits structurally poor soil, it sticks around on the surface. Eventually, with more rainfall, the water will wash into lower areas. This unabsorbed water brings chemicals that reside on top of the land and even the soil itself. Through this process, nutrients in land are displaced and lead to a variety of unwanted consequences. Valleys slowly level out because of the gradually added land, and growing material is washed away from where the food is actually supposed to be grown. Additionally, the unabsorbed fertilizers and pesticides applied to the plants are carried to a number of other destinations. Accidentally, these chemicals are dropped into places that disrupt surrounding ecosystems. If washed into waterways, they cause grave consequences in the life forms that exist underwater. This is clearly evident in the dead zone at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Midwest farms along the river contribute chemicals that flow south and eventually deposit in the Gulf of Mexico. Closer to home, fertilizers and pesticides in Wisconsin also drain into watersheds around here. Notably, excess amounts of fertilizer in Green Bay causes imbalances within the water that harms fish and the safety of our drinking water. Another factor in the unsustainability of agriculture is its reliance on fossil fuels, and thus its contribution to climate change. Fossil fuels are a non-renewable resource, meaning once we use them, they're gone. Fossil fuel stores are depleting, and without an unlimited supply, energy-intensive sectors will suffer. The fuel will eventually run out, and the usage of fuel contributes to climate change. Once again, a quick science refresher will help. When fossil fuels, such as coal or gasoline, are burned, it contributes carbon to the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is a greenhouse gas. The purpose of the Earth's atmosphere, much like a greenhouse, is to keep just the right amount of heat inside to make the planet habitable for humans. When the sun shines onto the Earth, some heat is absorbed through the atmosphere. Once inside, some heat waves bounce off the Earth's surface and make their way back upwards. The atmosphere naturally contains some CO2, but higher densities of carbon dioxide mean there are more molecules for heat to run into on its way back out. Some resistance on this exit is good, but too much causes extra heat to be trapped. This is why our world is warming. Agriculture uses fossil fuels whenever any kind of machinery is used, including plowing fields, application of fertilizers and pesticides, and transportation of foods. It contributes gas to the environment in other ways as well, like through raising animals, growing rice, or wiping out naturally carbon-absorbing environments. Land that is covered in plant life can actually take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Because plants need CO2, H2O, and sunlight to grow, they take some of the gas out of the air and store it below ground, or use it to function. Think of how the plant fed the helpful microbes below ground with carbon. Some forms of sustainable agriculture make use of this process and can naturally sequester atmospheric carbon and move it into the soil, decreasing the risk for global warming. To get a clear picture of part of agriculture's carbon footprint, let's take a look at the growing beef industry in Brazil. Vast plots of land have been converted from rainforest to barren land to raise cattle. This model produces beef that causes damage to the earth by the carbon released from the soil, lack of future sequestration, and the resources required to raise cattle. Animals, in general, are higher on the food chain and require more resources to be produced. Ruminant animals, ones that internally ferment food before digesting it, produce methane during this process. Methane is a greenhouse gas, 84 times as potent as CO2 for the first 20 years it is in the environment. This extra gas production makes raising ruminant animals, like cows and lamb, have higher carbon footprints than non-ruminant animal raising. Further, nitrous oxide, which is released through animal waste in the surrounding environment, is also incredibly potent, though less prevalent than carbon dioxide. In the US, animal agriculture has improved its efficiency and consequently lessened its negative impacts over the last 30 years. CAFOs, or confined animal feeding operations, have done a lot, provide 99% of animal products in the US. By raising as many animals as possible and making them as big as possible, more meat is produced for every piece of land and resource that is required. But, as you may have anticipated, this model also has its downsides. To achieve this efficient status, it employs questionable practices that abuses animal rights. Commonly, it also employs hormones and other antibiotics to avoid illness and boost animal growth. It also disrupts the loop of growth that I mentioned previously, in which plants and soil continuously share the same resources. On small farms, cows are able to graze directly on the land. This provides them with food, like grass, that is inedible to humans. The way they tear out of the ground stimulates the plant to shift its carbon underground and feed the microbes, kickstarting a vibrant exchange. On traditional farms, cows are also pooped on the same land that they feed off of, which leaves valuable fertilizer for the plants growing in the area. However, in CAFOs, cows are often fed grains, which require fertilizers, fuel, and land in another area to grow. And when they poop, it is collected in a tank or pool rather than directly dropped onto farmland. Depending on the operation, this manure can be delivered to a surrounding farmland, or alternatively left in a lagoon to pollute the atmosphere and leak into unwelcome places. However, as we are shown by Brown's Ranch in North Dakota, animal agriculture can actually be used in environmentally positive ways. Using high-density rotational grazing, cows can be a great help in storing carbon, fertilizing crops, and providing food on a scalable model. However, a majority of animal agriculture in the world does not employ these principles, and our growing global consumption of meat is leading us down a road of further environmental degradation and poor nutrition. Looking at a variety of foods, we can see the impacts that they make in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents. Without getting too wrapped up in the details, these measurements don't quite give the full picture of the harm or the benefit that each of these food categories provide. Just an average of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gas equivalent they make during the production. As we can see, animal products generally have higher footprints than plants. This is because they require more resources to grow and often have more pollutants within their growing process. Clearly, ruminant animals, the ones that burn methane and poop nitrous oxide, also are the highest greenhouse gas producers. Byproducts of those animals, like cheese and milk, also have large footprints because of this reason. They may even be higher than poultry, eggs, or pork. Perhaps these numbers surprise you. Ideally, we humans could eat without hurting the environment at all. And if we grew our food in natural ways and on local scales, and used our ways to replenish the soil, we could get a lot closer to reaching this goal. Historically, however, the emphasis has been on feeding a growing and starving population, and health and environmental sacrifices were made. The mass production of commodity crops that I mentioned before, things like grain, corn, and rice, is an efficient way to grow calories for a large population. However, overproduction of these crops has caused negative health impacts. For instance, cheap stores of corn have enabled lots of cheap corn syrup to become a common ingredient in low-nutrition foods. The surplus of the product means that these foods are cheaper than the less frequently farmed plants, such as fruits and vegetables. Unfortunately, the way our government subsidizes farmers maintains the outdated goal of creating the most food without any regard to quantity. Basically, if farmers follow a certain set of rules, growing the correct crops during the correct seasons, using the prescribed amount of fertilizers and pesticides, they are eligible to receive a safety payment from the government. That means that farmers can worry less about weather in bad seasons or unanticipated changes. These subsidies are a great step towards job security for farmers, but they also mandate a set of soil-degrading, low-diversity seasonal growth patterns that harms the land and eliminates the freedom of the farmer. Farmers can choose between a safety net and a more risky, unique path. At the end of the day, every farmer needs to be able to make a living and feed their own family before they're able to prioritize long-term goals. Visiting Parkridge Organics helped me discover this realistic objective. Being organic means Parkridge doesn't grow commodity crops with chemical inputs, so it's not part of the traditional subsidy system. Parkridge Organics, located outside of Fond du Lac, grows fruits and vegetables that are sold in a CSA program and at our Appleton Farmers Market. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture, and this is a way of selling directly to local consumers on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis. Parkridge also takes part in a co-op with another farm that raises animals and they sell their meat, dairy, and eggs. By teaming up with other farms, they're able to provide fresh, local food without having to go through a middleman or producing massive quantities. Unfortunately, with the rise in large-scale farms, many smaller farmers in the U.S. have been swallowed up by bigger corporations that cause all farms to adhere to slimmer profit margins. When you account for variations in growing seasons, like unusual rainfall, early freezes, or a new set of pests, the profit gets even more slim. Thankfully, through ingenuity and practice, many small farmers get to know their land, what grows best and how to grow it, and are able to stay above water. To be sustainable, our food system needs to align with these three objectives: human health, environmental sustainability, and economic stability. In terms of human health, steps must be taken by governments and farmers in order to make healthy foods more accessible to all people, regardless of their economic status or location. In general, people should be consuming less processed sugars and fats and more plant-based foods. Environmentally, steps need to be taken as well. Government subsidies should incentivize diversification of crops and sustainable practices rather than monocropping. Farmers and farm educators should continue to learn more and do their best to practice and teach sustainable methods. Consumers should also use their power to demand more sustainable practices by supporting positive impact companies. Western countries, those that consume the most meat and dairy, must decrease the amount they consume. Because of land, pollution, and resource requirements needed for animal agriculture, such heavy animal production is not sustainable for environmental health. Economically, farmers all across the world should be able to maintain financial security and be given adequate resources and education to implement sustainable habits. Additionally, food should be raised in ways that allows all people, regardless of their economic position, to be able to access food that fulfills their nutrient and calorie needs. This leaves the government, big agricultural corporations, farmers, and every one of us a lot of work to do in order to make a sustainable agriculture system. Going into this project, I anticipated learning information that would encourage me to take action of my own. At the beginning of the year, I set my focus skill to be creating impact with an emphasis on small-scale actions. Sometimes I get carried away with trying to make things the best they can be. In most cases, this ends up going all right. But in other cases, the need to make the best products, outcomes, or projects actually ends up wasting time and detracting from powerful progress that could have instead been made. Essentially, my goal was to shift my mindset from thinking I needed to solve all the world's problems to making small steps in progress to solve some of them. That doesn't mean my focus skill was an excuse to not make widespread change. In fact, it helped me realize that widespread change really comes from an impressive number of small efforts, rather than one grand effort. Because of that, my production looked a little bit different than the traditional production phase. To reflect my research and share it in different ways, I created a plan to implement 3 community and 3 personal outcomes, along with my written essay. Because I really like to organize and have a clear purpose for my actions, I created an impact statement document to help me plan, check in, and reflect on my production process. Here's a brief look at that document. For each outcome or product, I listed my goal, the purpose, how I would achieve the goal, and ways to measure my progress. This helped me define clear expectations and make consistent and meaningful progress throughout my production process. My 3 personal outcomes are efforts that I made in my own life and with the help of my family. The first was to buy local as much as possible. Thankfully, Appleton has a great farmers market for a lot of the year. Unfortunately, even the indoor market doesn't last year-round, and after January, I was unable to visit anymore. Once we enter spring, and plants are actually able to grow in Wisconsin again, I hope to sign up for a CSA or continue the market visits. In the meantime, there are still plenty of ways to support better brands when you buy at the grocery store. Organic Valley, for example, is a large co-op based in our state that gives small farms a way to produce and sell their milk and other products to customers. Even Riverview Gardens sells produce at some local grocers. Additionally, buying from brands who are transparent about their practices is another way to support better practices, even if it's not from the area. In addition to buying different brands, I have also made an effort to eat different foods. It is really easy to adopt a polarized view of food after learning how much harm it can cause. Looking at all the information on the internet makes it seem like you'll single-handedly kill the environment if you're not vegan, fail to consume sufficient protein if you are, and get heart disease if you end up eating meat. Those statements are all a bit misleading. Really, there are a lot of ways to eat imperfectly. And thankfully, you don't need to eat flawlessly to have a healthy life for yourself and for the environment. It does require a little bit of extra effort. All this is to say that I did not cut out meat, dairy, and processed foods entirely. It does mean I'm trying to eat them less frequently and eat plants more often. Generally, when I prepare food for myself, I opt for plant-based proteins, healthy fats, and fruits and vegetables over prepackaged options or animal products. I also set a goal to cook a plant-based meal for my family every week. This got us trying some new recipes and helped us consume less meat in our home. The third project I completed was making a compost pile for my household. If you don't know what a compost pile is, it's essentially just a trash pile of dead things. If you leave it alone long enough, the garbage will become a rich fertilizer and be great for gardens. The purpose of the compost is to close the nutrient loop and divert waste from the landfills. When trash is added to landfills, it ferments anaerobically, that is, without oxygen, causing methane and carbon dioxide to release. Disposing of old food and other natural waste in compost causes fermentation with oxygen and produces fewer greenhouse gases. During my planning phase, the 3 community products I chose were entirely different than what I actually ended up creating. After changing my plans a bit, I created a podcast, planned and held an experiment, and took political action to support sustainable agriculture in the state. The podcast was the most tricky for me. When making non-written products, I always feel a bit like fish out of water. I wanted to make sure my podcast was as professional as possible, but I have barely any experience creating them. In the end, I learned a lot about Audacity, recording and moving audio, and publishing podcasts. If you're interested in listening to it, it's called The Environmental Impact of Food Decisions, and it's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as a number of other streaming services. It stars my mother and I talking about the ways food can negatively affect the environment and 3 easy steps any of us can take towards positive agriculture. In order to move along some positive agriculture bills in the state and to improve the understanding that our legislators have of sustainable agriculture, I also sent letters to our 2 state senators, Ron Johnson and Tammy Baldwin. Additionally, I researched the candidates for Appleton's mayoral election and the Wisconsin Supreme Court justice position, and voted accordingly. The project I had the most fun creating was the 3-day experiment. You guys may know a bit about it from my recent speech or completing it yourself. The purpose was to increase understanding of food insecurity and the power of inexpensive action through 3 days of different diets. The first day, participants consumed food costing less than $3.50 for the entire day. The second day, people followed a diet I created that aims to optimize environmental benefits and human health benefits, while staying under $3.50. I created it using the Planetary Diet Guidelines from the Eat Lancet Commission, which gave recommendations about how much of certain types of food to eat every day. In the end, it was a lot of beans, rice, almond butter, and thankfully an entire serving of carrots. I'm very thankful to those who participated and hope that they got something out of the process and that they don't hate me for it. In addition to the variety of non-written outcomes, I've also created a research paper that covers a majority of my findings during this project. Throughout my time here at VNS, I've had lots of help from my peers, family, and advisors when it comes to revising and editing. During this process of my senior essay, those great mentors helped me out once again. After spending so much time completing this project, there's a lot of lessons I will take with me. As a person who takes a role in our agriculture system, I plan to continue to do what I can to lessen my impact in a balanced way. I'll keep up the habits that I've set in place and eventually expand them. I also hope to find ways to improve our nutritious food access within the communities that surround me. Poverty is present all over the world, and I'd like to find ways to make it less prevalent. In general, I will face expansive issues like climate change through a new lens. To me, there's a range of ways people react to this issue. On one end, there are people who feel that they don't need to do anything because a single person can't have an impact. On the other end, there are people who aim to produce zero waste and have non-existent footprints. My response is found somewhere in between the two extremes. In my own life, I plan to take action in ways that makes gradual progress that will be sustainable for my life well into the future. In addition to the shift in attitude, I've also gained more experience planning, researching, reflecting, and creating. One of the greatest skills I have practiced over my 6 years here at VNS has been pushing myself outside my comfort zone. Ever since the guided project, when I needed to call up my first live source, I have pushed to try new things, visit new places, and face scary tasks. It was worth the discomfort and vulnerability. The continuous cycle of goal setting, working, and reflecting I have taken part in at VNS is one that I have internalized and will continue in all areas of my life. Through college, internships, and whatever opportunities I can get my hands on, I plan to continue to broaden my horizon and continue to learn about complex issues. Next year, there is a 90% chance I will attend Knox or Macalester College, either in Illinois or Minnesota. At whichever institution I end up choosing, I will double major in environmental studies and international relations. Through that degree, my plan is to discover ways to make our planet and communities better equipped to face climate change and impact our current practices so less damage is done. Though I'm not entirely sure what I'll end up doing, I know it'll involve helping people and find solutions to the issues they face. The education and support I have received over my high school and middle school career has made a great last 6 years. I'm very thankful for the freedom and the responsibility I was given, as well as the wonderful community I have gotten to be a part of. Thank you. So now I'll open up for questions if anybody has any. Okay, we can just go with this. Yes.
You were researching what was essential for nutrition for the cheapest amount.
Mm-hmm.
I think I heard you mention that maybe there were aspects that, conflicting research about like protein maybe being overrated or things like that. What did you find as the bottom line as being what is needed?
Okay, so the question was asking about what are the actual bottom lines for our nutritional needs and how are those misinterpreted a lot of times. And I would say that a big thing that you find when you look at vegan diets or when you look at baseline nutritional diets, it's a lot focused on the protein. And so in media today, a lot of times there are higher protein recommendations than what you actually need to survive. So if you are a physically active person doing weight training and stuff, you definitely need a lot more protein. But a majority of the focus when it's talking about undernutrition is sheerly of the calories that you're consuming. And that's why there's such a range in the quality of calories, because our focus has been only on the quantity of calories rather than the nutritional value of those foods. So just looking at the quality as well as the quantity, I think is where we need to grow to improve the nutrition worldwide. Did that answer it at all?
It did. What are some specific examples? What are some specific foods that make the list?
So on the day that we completed the diet, it was actually a lot of rice and beans, and those two are very cheap foods, but that also have a lot of micronutrients in them if you're using brown rice, as well as beans too, just because they're whole foods and not processed.
What do you see as standards for the ideal agricultural environment, either here in America or just worldwide, and how do you believe we get there?
Will asked about what is the ideal agricultural situation looking at sustainability either worldwide or just in the US. And I would say that a lot of what needs to happen is farmers need to be given the capabilities to be able to experiment more with the land and working with the environment. And so one of the books I read during this project was called Growing Revolution, and the author essentially toured the world looking for different farmers who knew how to grow things on their land and were having success at it. And he found that the way we grow food throughout the world is vastly different. So you're not going to grow food in Wisconsin the same as you're going to grow it in Costa Rica. And so if we empower farmers to have more of that freedom on the farm and use the land and practices that they've either carried on through generations or new things they're experimenting with, I think we have a lot of room to grow there and improve sustainable agriculture in that way. Additionally, the subsidies that the governments give to farmers right now are what's limiting our agriculture system in the US to be able to be more sustainable, because they're incentivized to do things that are poor for the environment versus things that are more positive practices. Yes?
Just for the subsidies piece, could you maybe explain that a little bit more about an example of like the government subsidizes this and this is how it produces those negative effects?
Sure. So the question was to give an example of subsidized farming and how that produces negative effects. So if we look at the government subsidizing grain, for instance, they're basically telling a farmer that they have to subscribe to a certain set of growing practices. So they'll have to only be growing grain, not using cover crops or rotations, which are very important things in sustainable farming. And instead of those, they'll be using inputs, so like chemicals that are going to fertilize the crops or pesticides so that they're able to grow without being eaten by other animals or things like that. And so by the government mandating those inputs on the farms, they're also mandating a lot of fossil fuels that are tied up with putting those on the farm. So to create fertilizers, we need to process the chemicals, and that process is heavily dependent on fossil fuels and produces a lot of greenhouse gases. And as well as that portion, when you put them on the land, only a portion of them is actually absorbed into the plant and used to improve growth. Another portion of it is washed away or wasted, and that's not only a waste of resources, but also, as we saw, can do damage in other places. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Lydia?
I was just going to ask, what do you say to people that say the planet is dying? Because from my understanding, the planet isn't dying at this point. Stuff wouldn't grow if it was dying.
Okay, so what do I say to people who say the planet are dying? Well, there are portions of the planet that are depleting very quickly, and there are definitely parts of it that are dying. So we see like extinctions of certain types of animals, or like I was talking about with like sea things, those dead zones means there's no life there. So there are parts of it that are dying, but not all of it has died yet. And so we have a lot of ways to impact those practices to decrease those consequences at the moment. Yeah, we'll stop there, I think.
What results from this project are you proudest of?
What results from this project am I proudest of? I think the things that I'm most proud of are the long-term habits that I have ingrained in myself and also opened up my family and other people to, because those are the things that are going to be producing a long-term impact, but also opening the doors for more learning in the future too. Like I said, I hope to expand on the habits that I've created now. And I think just by doing those myself, I can help other people learn more about them and create a widespread impact in that way. Rosie?
How were you able to get like your family to agree to stuff like this? Because like I'm
Yeah.
trying to get my family to like try to implement something, and they're just like, no, that's stupid. So,
Okay. How did I get my family to buy into this and convincing people to maybe make changes in their habits? I think the biggest thing was just starting small, and also I did all this research, and so I was able to present to them in like a logical way, like why things need to be done. And so I think a lot of people, if presented with that kind of information, will realize that maybe their habits do need to change. But really, another thing is just starting with really small actions. So, like if I'm cooking for my family, they're not gonna say no to food generally. But I'm not like controlling everything that's coming in and out of my house. Like, you can't bring that thing in here, but because that's not the point. The point is just to start doing positive habits more frequently, and by focusing on that side, it's less of like restriction or things like that. Krista.
Advice to future seniors.
Oh, advice to future seniors. So I actually haven't thought of like a response to this question, even though I was like, oh, I'm gonna have something planned out. I guess it just as you're going through VNS, and especially in your senior year, don't hold yourself back. So if you're like scared of something, don't just avoid it. Or if you know that you really don't want to do something, but it would be really cool, like really try to make yourself do it. Because those are where like the most memorable things happen and the coolest things eventually happen. So yeah. Mrs. Zuki?
What's the alternative to tilling?
The alternative to tilling. Okay, so the alternative to tilling, so tilling is used as like a preventative thing for weeds and also to prepare the land, would be to use the three main pillars of sustainable agriculture. So those are using cover crops, diverse crop rotation, and minimal soil disturbance. So cover crops are things that you're planting along with your main crop, and those are gonna like spread their roots out and keep the soil in place. And also prevent against different bacteria and things like that. The crop rotations means that you're not planting the same thing in the same place every year, because that helps prevent pests from coming back and knowing exactly how to attack a plant in the same place. If it's the exact same plant, they know like the bacteria and pests will know exactly what's coming. So by doing a crop rotation, you're defending them against those yearly pests that are there. And so through that, there's been several experiments done across different places in the world, and they've proven to be equal to the same amount of production levels as places where tilling has been used and fertilizers have been used. Mrs. Kozlowski?
Stepping off of Mrs. Litke's question, if we, for example, just have backyard vegetable gardens or flower beds, how should we prepare the soil for cover crops and rotation? Should we be like just by hand pulling out the grass like a cow would eat the grass, or did you research other suggestions?
All right, so Ms. Kozlowski was asking about how we can prepare our gardens that we might have in our backyard in the same way without tilling and things like that. And that is an area in which I've mostly looked at like the mass scales, but a big thing of what we want to do when we're gardening in our backyard is improving the soil quality still. And so we're putting on things like the compost that has a bunch of alive things once alive things that have fermented, and those will fertilize the land, but also just getting organic materials, so coffee grounds and other things like that, just to build up the amount of carbon and other good nutrients that are in the soil. Then you'll be able to use less like fertilizers and stuff like that, and it'll naturally grow strong. But as far as tilling, it does do a lot to like mix organic material in different places in your backyard farm, and because it's not on as large of a scale, you're not losing vast habitats of carbon, like soil stored carbon. So it is less of an impact than the mass agriculture setting. Yep.
So what are the barriers for mass agriculture or doing that? If the answer's there, why aren't they going in that direction?
His question was why do we know these things, and why is mass agriculture not really changing their practices? A big reason for that is the fossil fuel industry. So like I mentioned, in the ways that we traditionally farm now, we are having machines that are fossil fueled running over the land to either plant, to till, to put on fertilizers, and with more sustainable methods, we wouldn't have those things. So the fossil fuel industries that are profiting off of farmers using fossil fuels are also having a large control over the subsidies that are present here in America and worldwide, because they are able to profit off farming being run in the traditional way, whereas there's no big big corporation interest in sustainable farming because it's using the resources that the earth already has and that aren't really profitable for another kind of group to benefit from. Will. Sorry.
Yeah, this is kind of a very broad question, but it does relate to the topic. It's so as sort of banking on with that, the fossil fuel industry not necessarily sort of conforming to healthier ideas of agriculture, and sort of broader is this idea that throughout history, as technology progresses, it becomes bigger and uses up more of our natural world in that environment. And now we're getting to a point where we're trying to find ways to curb that technological advancement in a way that helps sort of improve the environment, but in order to do that, we need to build more technology. So my question to you is kind of, I don't even know if you can have an answer for this, but how do you create a healthier relationship between sort of industry and technological advancement and the natural world? And do you think there is a solution to that?
Okay, so how do you balance the natural world and human technology advancements, and how can we create a future that balances those two things well? I would say that in the case of agriculture, we are able to create food for humans by just using systems that are already naturally within the earth. So we don't need to make chemical fertilizers or have machinery to make food. The issue does come in though when we have a growing population and we need to be able to produce more food. And so I think genetic modification is an area where those two things can really benefit from each other, as long as we know the long-term effects of genetically modified food. Like we can make things more nutrient rich, especially if our soil is depleted and the soil won't add those nutrients naturally. And so it's definitely a very gray area between how much technology we want to use and how much we want to revert to the natural cycles of Mother Nature. And I guess I don't have the answer for that, and I don't think there is a consensus on that, obviously, because there's many interests in technology especially that would prefer to move always towards fossil fuels and further technology rather than just the function of the earth that would naturally happen. Yeah, so that's my half answer. Thank you. Ms. Gare?
Are there companies, organizations who are experimenting with, say, current agricultural machinery that is not fueled by fossil fuels? So electric plows, electric irrigation systems, or something like that?
Yes, Ms. Kay is asking about if there are non-fossil fuel reliant technologies that are beginning to come up throughout the world and being experimented with. And yes, there definitely are. I would say probably on a smaller scale than traditional agriculture tools. But I learned about a tool that they use that just runs it's just like a wheel and it's just drawn across farm fields and just plants seeds right on top. So that means that they're not digging into the land, tilling it up, and then putting the seed in. They're just dropping it on the top. And did see some fairly productive results with that as well. So I think the problem is that they're less known about and the production is on smaller scales. So it just needs some time to grow and the backing from a variety of corporations or governments, whoever that ends up being, to make more of a name for itself.